you for reminding me. So what I did was I took a little bit of my CAD yellow medium and my CAD red light, and I mixed my secondary there. And then I have and so with my palette set up over here, I also have my shop towels. I have a little bit of mineral spirits. I use Gamsol. I do have my walnut oil here, or linseed oil, just an oil. And so now I'm going to make my magenta. And so I'm using that color there. Not magenta, but sorry, my violet purple. So I'm using my cool red, cool blue, which ultramarine. And that's pretty good for the exercise. I like to try to move towards like a what we call a dioxazine purple. And for this painting, we don't need a lot of paint. Finally, mix our green. And they use our cerulean blue. This is a hue because cerulean blue gets very expensive. And I use my nice cerulean blue for my own paintings. The CAD yellow light. And I'm going to try to mix like something like an emerald green. So I could already tell I have way too much blue. So put that over there. And again, aiming for like a emerald green, or you could aim for a lime green. Grass green would also be good. I would say not too dark of a green, which is, it's hard to get really dark using the cerulean and the lemon yellow. I might have to mix more green later. And if at any point you have a hard time seeing what I'm doing, just let me know. You can see
I'm
I have
having
white.
a,
We're not
I'm
going to need
sorry.
white. Sorry, go on, Sita.
I'm having it's cider, apple cider.
Cider,
Um,
okay.
so I'm after the red. I'm having a hard time seeing the colors. Is that orange, red, and then
So you could also pull up the PDF under our modules where I
okay,
have a photograph of them and I list them too. So this is our CAD red light.
uh-huh.
And then this is so I'm using a quinoxidrone red.
Oh, okay,
You could use alizarin, but if you do, make sure it's a permanent alizarin.
okay,
And then here I have the purple that I mixed, the violet purple,
purple,
uh,
okay,
ultramarine blue,
okay,
cerulean blue,
okay, and
and
then
then the green that I just mixed.
okay, great, thank you.
So Yeah, if you wanted to, you could. I was able to take a better photograph of the palette. Um, I'm gonna switch cameras now. Oh, actually, before I switch cameras, I'm not gonna really have. If anybody at some point wants to see the camera or the palette, I'm not gonna have the palette on today, because we're just moving in the order of light to dark. So I'm gonna start here, and then I'm gonna go there, and then I'm gonna go there, and then I'm gonna jump to green. And this is also in the PDF of the assignment. Jump to green, and then over to my red, and then these start to get really dark, right? So then before that, I go cerulean, or sorry, this red, that red, then my cerulean, and then there and there. They're numbered on the document, so if you need to refer to that, but also you could just remember from light to dark. Ultimately, in the end, if you kind of mix up your really darks, it won't matter too much. And so I'm going to work with a drawing brush. So a brush that I feel comfortable drawing with. That's up to you. I tend to like a number two round or something for drawing. These are brand new brushes because I have really beat up brushes. Like if I showed you my brushes for so that's what one of my brushes looks like from my studio brushes, which would not be a good brush to use for a demonstration like this. I'm going to try the two and see if that's not too big for my underpainting here. So I'll leave it
With
on.
regard with
Sorry, what was
regard to brushes, I know that there are synthetic and then there's a bristle.
that?
And I bought somewhere along the line old things that are some of them are bristle, some of them are synthetic. What do you suggest using? Which of the two and why?
So it kind of depends on how you paint. So when I paint big, when I'm not painting this kind of painting, I tend to paint very vigorously. Um, and so I use like a hog hair bristle, like a standard bristle brush, like something like this,
Okay, yeah.
right? For those first layers, because I'm really rough and I'm working on a canvas that it hasn't been smoothed out with paint yet. And so the canvas itself is a little rough. And so if I were to use my synthetics, or let's say I had like a mongoose hair or something, your brushes would get destroyed right away in those first passages, if you're painting rough. And so I tend to use the bristles, like these tough bristles, like a hog hair or something like that, for large paintings where I'm gonna be scrubbing and doing a lot of stuff. Um, so it's a good scrubber brush type of type of thing. Good for underpaintings on a raw canvas, or directly on the canvas. I use synthetics for everything beyond that for the most part. Um, I don't. I'm not like I think like things like mongoose hair, and so what's the other one, that popular animal one? Sable. Those get too soft for me. I would destroy them right away. But everybody has a different sensibility, different touch. Those are great for, the layers, the upper layers where you already have some paint on the surface and some oil on the surface.
Mhm.
I would definitely not recommend using like a nice sable or something like that on a raw canvas in a rough manner. But synthetics are nice, and then it's just a matter of how stiff you want them. So I try to buy synthetics that are a little stiff. They have a little bit of a pushback. If they're too soft, I destroy them too fast. So I like a little bit of a pushback on the stiffness of those brushes.
Okay, really
I
appreciate
don't
it.
have a lot of experience with these Catalyst Princeton brushes, but I have been liking them lately for this type of painting. But like I said, if I showed you what I call my bad brushes, like they're all kind of beat up, and I like them for that reason. I like that they give me different types of marks. Um, but they're definitely not good if I'm trying to make a precise kind of painting. And so what I'm going to be doing here is I'm just going to be using a little bit of that's the tainted one. So I'm going to get a fresh bit of oil. Sorry, not oil. I'm dipping a little bit of my Gamsol. So I'm just using a little bit of thinner just to make my paint a little bit more fluid for the drawing stages. I don't want to put too much because then I'll start to obliterate. And now I'm going to switch to and so essentially that's all, anything I'm adding. I'm not going to be mixing any of these colors. I'm just going to do this, draw my underpainting, and then move on to my next color and do the same and so forth, not mixing them. They'll mix on the canvas a little bit. I'm going to switch cameras now. All right. And so I've got my dollar bill up there. You can see it's lifting a little, it's lifting a little bit off the wall. And I gave it a cardboard background. That way it keeps it all in the muted, this brown. Um, as I stated, I'm just painting today on like a panel that like these leftover panels that I create for my demonstrations that then eventually become other types of paintings. And I'm just going to start to sort of draw it in, you know. This first stage, it's going to be really light. Um, I'm holding my brush pretty far back. At this stage, if I don't like my position, you know, like I'm already thinking I maybe put it too high. Maybe I want to have it a little lower, actually. So I'm a big believer in just like, you know, like sometimes when I'm teaching my my young college community students, or my LCAT students, and they're like, what if I make a mistake? I'm like, well, it's painting, so you just paint over it. You know, it's and so right now what I'm kind of trying to do is get the right angle of it, the right proportions. Um, you know, I could start to lay in some of these items, you know, some of the what I would call like maybe like anchor points. So I'm just going to take off my jacket here. It's a little warm in here. And I don't know if it looks like this on your screen, but does it look like a fluorescent or yellow a little bit to you?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Very,
Yeah, you know, that's the issue with streaming. So I assure you, it's not, it looks more like lemon yellow in
at
person.
least we can see it.
Yeah. And so because at this stage, I can't like get into too many of the details because, you know, it's like there's only so much value difference you can get in between the yellows. So I'm really just more concerned with kind of like the general proportions. I can start to think about things like, you know, some of these shadow shapes. So for example, I can see that this shadow kind of goes down here and does this.
Mhm.
And so I could just block it in like this. Knowing that I later, like maybe this needs to go lower down here, I can paint on top of that later. You know, along the way, I'm going to be sort of making corrections as I make this painting. And then, you know, maybe the shadow's too big. You know, correct it later. You know, a painting is a series of corrections, as many of my teachers used to say. And so that's why sometimes students have a hard time getting started, you know. And when I say students, I don't usually I'm not referring to y'all. I'm referring to like my students that are in their 20s and early 20s. They tend to be very timid about making mistakes and starting things. And, you know, painting and drawing is one of those things where it's like you have to just start to know.
Yeah.
I'm not really concerned about any of the text. I'm more really interested in sort of some of these shape relationships, you know, like where these corner, and then as the painting progresses, I can get a little bit more specific. You know, it's like, I know, for example, I have a big sort of text here where it says the United States of America. And so I could kind of maybe just do a rectangle at that, about that width for this point. You'll notice I'm you know, when I approach a painting, I'm very free about it. I'm not too concerned with like quote unquote accuracy. I'll get there. You know, it'll happen over the evolution of the painting. And that's one thing about painting is painting is different than photography in that it's embedded with time. You know, photo, especially, well, photos now are different, but a photo in a traditional camera, you know, it's like a split instance of a moment. Whereas a painting is a sort of palimpsest of a long time condensed into a single object in layers. It is a little too far this way. And at any point, once I feel like I have enough information, I can start to move forward. But what I want to do is I want to at least silhouette my George Washington in here because I could see that it's darker over here than it is like in the middle area. And so again, I'm squinting, I'm abstracting this light shape, knowing that I can't be precise yet. I'm gonna get precise later. Once I have darker values, I can start to differentiate. All right. So it doesn't exactly look like a dollar bill, but I think if someone saw this, they would know it's a dollar bill. I'm gonna move on to my warmer orange. And every time I move to a darker color, and this is someone brought this up. I forget if it was maybe Joy or someone had said, you start in the darks. Yeah, this this is sort of why they say that, because now I'm moving towards a darker value. It's still very light, but in comparison to this, it's darker. So I'm going to start in the darks.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Oh.
Right? That's the easiest thing for me to see. The darks are the easiest thing to see. They stand
Oh,
out.
the dark's on there. Okay.
I'm also a believer in painterly paintings. So I like to have paint on the surfaces. I'm not into photorealism. You guys will see. You can be into photorealism, and we can talk about how to get your painting to that degree. But I think with with the focus on a painting like this, where we're not painting from a photo, the focus should not try to, the focus shouldn't be to try to make it photorealistic. And in fact, I think it should be more like realistic in terms of the way we experience the world. We are in constant flux. We are constantly moving. Our eyes are constantly darting. They very rarely sit in one place and look at every single detail in one moment. And so I think we can make paintings that are more realistic when they're less photorealistic, if that makes sense. Another area so I started off in this area because it was darker. There's silhouetting behind George Washington's head. Another area though that we know that it gets darker would be in like this, which would allow us to also start to shape our drawing a little, our painting a little bit. So I kind of lost this corner. Like I'm not like, where does the corner, where does the shadow versus where is the dollar bill? And this is where we can start to redraw that.
Wow.
And I'm trying to hold my brush at the back of the brush because then it makes it a little easier to make these lines. But also then I tend not to try to render it. So rendering is when we're trying to make it all realistic with light and shadow rendering, right? And what happens is the more we choke up on our brush, the more we start to draw. The more we think we're drawing, we
Yeah.
start to behave like drawing. And so it's all of a sudden like, oh, let me shade it in here, like, and let me get into these details. This is detail hand, right? However, when I do this, I no longer have the option to get in there and start rendering tiny details because I'm holding it too far back. It won't let me. Also, you will tend to draw more from your shoulder when you hold it this way. There's a tendency to make what we call wristy paintings like this. This is great for watercolor, etc. Maybe even will be good when you get into some detail. But you don't want your whole painting to be wristy. Um, you want it to have some arm and some body in it. I'm also a fan of wiggly lines, and we're like I said, we're in constant flux. And I don't know if anybody in here is a David Hockney fan,
Yeah.
but David Hockney talks a lot about this idea of like the difference between a photo and a painting, and the way that time is different in a painting, but also sensibilities.
Excuse me, did you start with cool yellow and now you're losing cat yellow?
Yes, I started with the like the lemon yellow, the cool yellow,
Oh, thank you.
and then I'm moving towards my warms. And it's almost like in a way like clay, like in that like I just put it over here, a dark shape, because I can see that there's a dark shape there. And then later I'll like carve it up and break it apart and but right now I'm sort of just like trying to orient the drawing in a colorful forward value way. Like I don't need to draw this one in here yet, like if I squint my eye, I could still kind of see and maybe I can like pull it out a little bit, but I don't need to. Yeah. I will come in later with a different color and get it by pushing, because I'm going to get to a darker color and then I can do around the one and then the one will be left yellow or orange. It's a very backwards and forwards kind of thinking process. And I love that painting is sort of like anti-intellectual in many ways. Okay. So now I'm going to move towards my next color, which is going to be orange. And I think starting with orange, I can start to scumble over the entire image. And I'll show you that at the end of this pass.
Cool.
And if you don't know the term scumble, scumble is where we take a certain amount of paint without adding any thinner to it, without adding oil or terp. Sorry, I say terp, but I mean Gamsol. Um, Using a dry brush and kind of scraping your brush over the surface, a scumbling. But I think after my orange, I can start to do that. So again, I'm starting in some of the darkest areas first. It's easier to see those. It's easier to identify those. But as Joy indicated earlier, one of the main reasons why oftentimes you start with your dark, like if an instructor is having you start with the darks, oftentimes that's because darks act as anchors. They anchor the drawing. They anchor the painting. And so sometimes you evaluate your painting and you say, oh, I need to push my darks. I need to get more darks in there because they'll help anchor the painting. They give the painting weight. It's almost like the painting is floating, but you got to pin it to the wall in some way. And by adding our darks, it starts to pin it into, another way to think about it, it's like it gives it gravity.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
If you use like a black canvas, how would you do the underpainting? Still from light to dark?
I wouldn't do a black paint. I wouldn't start on a black canvas unless I was making a conceptual painting for some reason. And what I mean by that is, this is what I would call research painting, meaning that for me, it's like a practice, right? Like I'm practicing my skills. But when I make my studio paintings, all of a sudden, all the processes I learned of how to make an accurate, like a painting like this, can go out the window. Because when I'm making those paintings, I'm interested in some other thing.
Yeah.
And so, for example, if I see a painting on a black surface, like a black canvas, I start to think about like maybe like velvet painting, for example, in Mexico. And so, for example, a contemporary Chicano painter might be making paintings that are traditional paintings, like, or something, but then might use a black canvas because they're speaking to like the folk kitsch tradition of black velvet painting in Mexico. And so what I mean by that is as soon as we start to make decisions that are different than the sort of accepted traditional reason supply, either materials or processes, it usually has something to say about the idea in the painting, the concept of the painting,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. And so I wouldn't recommend, if you're trying to learn how to paint a painting like this, to work on a black surface. There's a lot of reasons why, right? Like, why do we work on a white surface? Well, one reason is because when light travels through the paint, it hits the white surface and bounces back, so it creates a more luminous image. This is why certain painters used to prime their paintings with lead prime. The lead adding metal minerals added to that reflective quality. When you paint when you gesso or when you have a black surface, you're not going to get that luminescent quality. It becomes a lot harder to make a luminescent, brighter painting. So that could be good or bad. So I think about like the artist Kerry James Marshall, for example, African-American painter.
Yeah.
And he often will paint on a black surface, partly because he's dealing with a flesh tone when he paints black people. He's using like a sort of charcoal flesh tone, like a generic flesh tone, rather than a more naturalistic type of flesh tone. So we can see how the orange is making our dollar stand out a little bit, right? I'm just going in and kind of hitting these like darker areas, knowing that I'm still going to come back with even darker colors later. I can continue to correct my drawing along the way. And yeah, feel free to ask questions while I paint, because there's a tendency for either me to sort of zone out and just be painting, or to just start rambling.
I like your rambling.
Okay. I find that painting like this is a lot less stressful, because all of a sudden, like questions about like, oh my God, is it accurate? Oh, am I messing it up? They all go out the window. I'm not worried about those things. And instead, I can like be more invested in the paint itself and having fun and moving the paint around and asking questions about like vision, is this really what I see right here? Or is it not? I love Cezanne, and I like what he says about like when he talks about painting a cylinder or an ellipse, right? So when you see like a bowl at an angle, right, you get an ellipse. He'd argue that ellipses don't exist. And I agree. If you ever try to paint a bowl and try to paint the ellipse, it keeps moving. And that's partly because you have two eyeballs, right? Like we're not like a camera that has one lens. And so if you ever like held your finger up in front of your face and then close one eye and then close the other eye, your finger moves. And so, you know, when I look at something, sometimes it's there and then I look up again and it's not there anymore. And that's because like either my head slightly moved to the left a little bit, or maybe the angle of my head moved. Um, if you notice, you're constantly kind of wavering. Your head is kind of like always moving back and forth a little bit. You're not, we're not completely still. And then I find that painting is like a space where I can start to think about all sorts of things at the same time. So I like, like painting a dollar bill might make you think about a lot of things right now with the economy. Um, but there's also like other questions when you're painting that might arise. And so like painting becomes like this space for quiet contemplation and thinking about a lot of things while you're doing one thing. And so here's where I can like maybe start to scumble my orange in other places. See, I'll get maybe a larger brush that I have lying around. So really light in here because I don't want to obliterate everything I've been doing.
At some point, do you wonder that you're mixing the colors too much and losing them?
Yeah, losing and finding again, I think
Right?
is
Yeah, that's what I'm finding. I'm
I
a little nervous.
yeah, that's part of the process. I think it can make some people uncomfortable a little bit. But I think painting is partly finding and losing and finding again. I think if you, I think painting that is in a straight line, that moves in a straight line, is maybe formulaic painting,
Ah,
right? Like it means like
yeah.
like I don't. And personally, I'm not into formulaic painting because
Yeah.
if I already know what's going to happen at the end of the journey, why do I don't want to do that.
What's the point?
Yeah.
I'm with you.
And so I think losing and finding again is a great aspect of painting and art making in general.
Well, that makes
Like,
me feel better.
yeah, like well, art, that's what's so great about art making. It's a space in which a lot of the things that are not allowed in the quote unquote real world are very much allowed and embraced and even encouraged in art making. Like, studies show that we learn through play. And at
Hmm.
some point, they determine based on some arbitrary number of years that we've been alive, they're like, okay, now you learn in a boring way.
Yeah.
And I'm a big believer in like, you lose yourself in the painting and then you try to find the painting again and then you lose it again. It's like it mirrors back to what I was saying about like this idea that, ellipses don't exist. Like you look at the ellipse and you draw it and then you look at it again and it's actually not there anymore. It's in a different spot now. Um, and so now you got to adjust the ellipse again but now you're looking at it again and it's actually a little different. And so when you look at a Cezanne painting, you can see that hesitation in the work.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And that's why Merleau-Ponty, the phenomenologist, has a really fantastic essay called Cezanne's Doubt. And it's all about Cezanne's painting as a process of doubt.
I have a question with regard to your scumbling,
Mhm.
because I'm seeing you just finished your orange, but it looks like you're scumbling with the cad yellow medium.
Yeah, so what I did was, so if if I draw my orange, right? If I draw everything in orange and then I scumble orange over everything, I'll erase what I just did.
Right.
But
Okay.
if I put my orange and then instead I use the yellow that's around and scumble that around along with some of the orange, I don't completely lose my drawing.
Huh?
Got it.
Right?
Okay.
Because it's a different, like if I use this, like for example, right now when I use green, I'm gonna draw in green, but I'm not gonna scumble in green. I'm gonna scumble in orange. So as I scumble, I'm gonna use the color before.
Got it.
So when I move from green to red, after I draw the red, then I'm gonna scumble back in green. You can't,
Mhm.
if you scumble with the same color you just drew, you will erase your drawing, right?
Yeah.
So that's the I try to always find like a rule of thumb type of thing, It's like if you don't remember this, well remember this instead. So if you don't remember the order to paint these colors, you could either refer to the PDF where I put the order in, or you can ask yourself light, or you can just tell yourself light to dark, right? So similarly, with the scumbling, the general rule is don't scumble with the same color you just drew.
When you scumble, is it all directional in the same direction?
It's up to you, and you can tell how like in certain areas I scumbled less because I didn't want to erase everything in there. In some areas I scumbled a little bit more rough. So part of it is, and this is kind of what I mean by one of the things that this process helps you sort of figure out is like with very little on the line, you're not going to ruin a painting because you're just starting the painting. But one of the things that it will help you is making those determinations yourself, right? Like, oh, if I scumble it here, I might totally obliterate what I just did. And so over here, I'm going to scumble lighter than over here where I have nothing, where I can scumble real dark, right? So you're going to have to, part of it is, and that's why if you overdo it, you mess up one passage. Well, don't worry, you got another color. You're going to come in and redraw it.
I think the question was, and now
Oh.
I have the same question is,
Okay.
when you scumble, do you do all vertical or all horizontal, or does it matter?
It doesn't matter. In the background, I did vertical because when I paint, there is something about the brush stroke direction that says something about the form of what you're painting.
Yeah.
And so if you think about a wall, walls go up and down. They do go across, but what is more significant about a wall is that it goes up and down, right? And so my strokes, when I paint a wall, I tend to go up and down. Whereas when I paint a floor, I tend to go left and right
Uh-huh.
because the
That's how
floor
the
is
light
flat
hits
like this. And that's how light hits it. Yes.
So Christian,
Uh-huh.
if you paint this in the portrait mode, you still go up and down?
I would if it's a wall. And again, that's like it's sort of, it's like a rule, but it's also a rule that doesn't have to be followed. There is just a tendency that like brush strokes can help reinforce structure because brush strokes are like drawing, right? So if you think about like a Michelangelo drawing, like or a Leonardo da Vinci, and you think about cross hatching, they go across the form to show roundness, right? So there's something about mark making that says something about the structure of something. And so if a wall is flat and goes up and down, my brush strokes can reinforce that up and downness of a wall. Whereas the sky, we think of wind going from this way. So a sky I might paint like this, left to right, across. That being said, if it's a rainy, stormy day, well, my brush strokes might go this way in the sky. Right? So there's something, so if we remember that the brush stroke itself, the mark is related to drawing, and drawing is related to structure. How can I either reinforce or do the opposite? Because there's plenty of painters that want to do the opposite. I think of someone like Soutine,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like trying to make his paintings, chaotic in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so he wouldn't necessarily adhere to some of these like ideas that I'm talking about right now, because he wants to do the opposite maybe.
Christian,
Uh-huh.
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but I love hearing everyone's comments, but it doesn't appear that you're screen sharing, and so I have you on speaker view, but when someone comments, we lose your painting.
If you pin it, hit pin,
Yeah, you can pin it
it'll
yourself.
stay.
Can it? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I had to pin it too because I kept switching and I want to be able to see what I'm painting. But here I put a little bit too much paint on the surface, so I'm just pulling it back with some with my paper
Oh.
towel, my paper towel.
Ooh, look at that.
Now that's green, right?
Yeah, I moved from orange to green before I go to my red.
Oh, I thought green was last. Oh.
No, it's last in terms of the color spectrum and the way
Ah.
but in terms of value, in terms of light to dark, if I went green last, it's too light compared to, my darker reds.
Ah.
And so that's what I mean by like
The
it
value.
goes out of order than how you have it laid out, which I think is a good way to learn because you keep having to remind yourself, like, oh, it's a different order. It's a different order, which reinforces the order of the other, while keeping you on task. So what happened here was I didn't dilute my paint enough when I first put it down, so it was like a lot thicker. And so one of the goals in this assignment is dealing with different viscosities of paint, right?
Yeah.
On this underlayer, you're going to want to use the right amount of whatever you're using as your thinner. You can use oil or you can use like a mineral spirit of some sort. I would recommend Gamsol if you're using mineral spirits.
Christian, how do we pin it?
I just used a piece of painter's tape.
No,
but-
no.
sorry.
How do we pin it
I think
so we don't keep losing you when someone else chats?
When you go to that screen that's got everybody's picture and you see his picture, click on it and it should give you the option to pin.
That's how I did it, yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you for helping on the technicality
Sorry.
of Zoom. No, it's so helpful. I haven't taught on Zoom since 2021, and we were still in the pandemic.
Right, yeah. I
Um,
taught during then too, yeah.
and back then, it's like they didn't know everything on Zoom yet. Like even Zoom didn't know because I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember, but there was like horrible fiascos at schools where they had like an event going with the speaker, and then like people would jump on the stream and start saying curse words and doing all.
Ooh.
Um, And so then it took a while for the schools to figure out how to deal with the privacy issues, like how to lock down the Zoom so that strangers can't get in, and Zoom had to create new features. It was a crazy time. You remember. I don't need to remind you.
Yeah, now I have a question with regard to acrylics. So when you're talking about Gamsol and all that stuff for
Water.
oil painting,
Yeah.
so we would use matte medium and or water.
Yeah, whatever your preferred choice is. You might be using a retarder that might also create more viscosity. So if you're using something that like slows down your paint from drying so that you can actually manipulate it, because that's the main reason why acrylic painting is harder than oil painting is just the drying process.
Yeah.
You don't have the ability to go in and, so it's like if I don't have the right temperature, I can always come in here and just like add a little bit of a color to get that temperature because it's still wet. Whereas obviously with um, your sorry, with acrylic paint, if it dries too fast, you kind of have to be more accurate unless you're using some kind of slowing down medium. And keeping in mind that this underpainting can continue to be vague all the way through the final version. You could even go back and look at my demos. I'll upload some of those demos to the drive, to the canvas. That way you can see um, that the underpainting itself might end up differently. The final stage of the first step is going to be vague and blurry. Because when you come in and paint the local color, that's when you can really focus on like the accuracy of, some of these shapes that we're dealing with. It's got these little like leaves and, as someone suggested earlier, there's a lot of things on the dollar bill that we may not be aware of. So I'm dealing with, I remember this this is always an issue, like you got your text here, but then you also have this like small ridge here where it says Federal Reserve Note, right? And then we still have another white edge at the end, like a light edge. But all of that I'm going to take care of in those sort of when I'm dealing with the local color or as I continue to refine the drawing through the darker colors using both positive and negative space. So for example, when I get to this one, the number one in here, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint a darker color around the number one shape so that the negative space creates the one.
Yeah.
This really takes me out of my comfort zone. I want to draw it before I paint it. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And there's different schools of thought. There's a lot of people think, want painting to be a lot more like drawing. But I like painting to be a lot more like painting.
Me
Um,
too.
Meaning that what are the things that make painting different than drawing? It's the
Right.
same question, I would ask of myself if I'm painting a photograph, right? Like if I'm choosing to paint from a photograph, there's the logical reason, right? Which is maybe I can't be in the space that I want to paint, right? Like maybe I want to paint a landscape of Hawaii. I can't be in Hawaii and I can't paint that landscape. That aside, if I'm making a painting from a photograph, I would ask myself, why am I making this a painting? Why is it not a photograph? In what way is this going to be better or different as a painting if it's already a photograph? And similarly, if this is a painting and not a drawing, how is it different than a drawing? And
Which brings us back to Wayne, who said, hold on, let me see. Our capacity to see things not there and create invest meaning importance into otherwise neutral composition of shapes and combos. So we may have this fabulous photo, but maybe we want one aspect to really shine. That's what I'm kind of getting from it.
That could be it, right? Or it could be that an artist is responding to previous representations of those things. You know, there's so many answers to that question. And I think, it becomes individualized according to the artist, right?
Right.
But I do ask myself, so as an instructor, I ask myself, what is the difference between drawing and painting? And, based on my research and my own practice, et cetera, the fundamentals to me is like drawing deals with, and this is from where you can start to extrapolate. And this is where I think some people start to get a disconnect from modern art or more correctly, contemporary art. Is that what's happened is over time, over a long conversation of art, the questions we might have asked of painting started to be asked of essentially everything.
Yeah, excuse me, the green you are using is hue?
I mixed my green. So I used cerulean blue and I mixed it with my lemon yellow to make green.
Oh,
But if
yes,
you
thank
want
you.
to, but if you wanted to buy a tube green, like if you just wanted to buy the hue instead of mixing it each time, the color I would recommend is either emerald green or cadmium green, or like a lime green.
Lime green, emerald green, and what? Lime green, emerald. Okay, thank you.
Part of the reason why we scumble also is to kind of eliminate some of the edges, like the harder edges or basically to make it blurry again. And so people had a lot of questions about scumbling. So a lot of it is intuition, right? So like right now, I did my drawing and I scumbled in here my green a little bit. Just because I know I can get some green in here without obliterating my drawing by lightly scumbling it because it's a lighter value. But also because I kind of wanted to eliminate some of the drawing marks that were a little too overt, like a little too committed right now. Like I'm not ready to commit to that there in that moment yet. So maybe this process is difficult for people who have commitment issues and easy for people who have commitment. I'm kidding.
This is psychology class.
I do think there's a lot when I look at my previous drawings, et cetera, and paintings, I could start to, this student's a very bold person, they're very, like versus this person might be a very
True.
quiet person and they're soft spoken. So maybe not psychological, but maybe at least some personality type traits. Okay, so now I came back with my orange and I'm scumbling it in. Part of our goal by the time we're done with this underpainting is to get rid of all the white of the canvas. And that's why someone had asked earlier, should we add an imprimatura to our canvas? This will be our imprimatura eventually. It'll be our underpainting that'll cover the whole thing. But the goal is to eventually get the entire white of the canvas covered. My teachers used to call them holidays, like you took a day off. Like, what are all these, what are all these holidays on your painting? These little white spots.
Are you scumbling with orange now?
Yeah, so because I did my layer in green, I'm going to go back and scumble in orange to the background, which I really didn't do last time. This is where I'm using my synthetic. Normally I would be using a hog hair for this because you see how I'm kind of brushing rigorously on a raw canvas surface. Not raw canvas, but you know what I mean. And so this beats up your brushes a little bit more, this kind of scumbling if I was scumbling over some painted surface, it would be less of an issue. But part of it is to kind of get rid of a lot of stuff. Soften all my edges when I do this. Maybe get rid of some of these. And so little by little, the dollar starts to emerge out of a white space. It's like the drawing. Oh, so actually, I'll pause for a second. I'm gonna get a little bit of this orange in here too. Uh-oh. See, I completely lost it. It's not a big deal because what I'm going to do is in the next color, moving into red, I'm going to start in the darks, which, I'm going to kind of keep repeating this as Joy mentioned earlier. We often start in the darks. Well, every time we do a pass, we're starting back in the darks because it allows us to reestablish the drawing, the anchor to weigh it down again. I'm going to start off in this same sort of region. Down here, the dark shape behind Washington just blends right into the right side of his shirt. So that becomes one shape. I'm not differentiating between those two shapes. The same thing on this side. When I get to this side, the shadow shape behind Mr. Washington here blends right into the shape of his jacket right here.
Yeah.
Same shape, basically. They're similar.
That's CAD red.
Yeah, this is my CAD red light. The colors are going to start to mix as a wet into wet, but there's also going to be a little bit of an optical mix. That's where we use an optical mix is when it's broken color, meaning colors that are next to each other or overlapping each other, but not completely blending. And then if you're finding yourself a little frustrated with this first stage of the painting, just keep reminding yourself that you still have the next step of the painting where you can actually paint like what you see. Like that's the stage of the painting where the accuracy and correctness become more important. Because that's where you're gonna like you're gonna be differentiating your values, you're gonna be strengthening the drawing. The other good spot that I could have started off with if I didn't want to start back here, I start here because all of us will have that shape, that dark shape, if you're drawing a dollar bill. But I could have also started in my cast and trap shadows. And my paper actually, my dollar bill actually folds a little bit right here. So when I eventually get to that, I'll definitely try to capture that quality. So at some points, and this is where if you remember, if you ever took a drawing class and you talked about line weight, thick versus thin line, right? So the line on right for me, which will in my final stages, I'll be more interested in clarifying, but my line starts off thin, then gets a little thicker, and gets thin again, and then it gets thicker again, thicker, thin again, and then here's where it gets a lot thicker. And then I can soften that edge, drying off my brush, and then just swinging it across here to soften that edge. I can scumble that out if I don't like that there because it's too hard of an edge. And now we have a shadow, very colorful shadow. The shadow has greens and oranges and reds and yellows in it. Red is a strong color, so when you get to red, just be careful about overdoing it. Again, if you mess it up and you overdo it, you still have your dark red and your blue and your purple to reestablish the drawing. I actually just realized I went in the wrong order on one of them, but that's okay. I'm just gonna go do blue next instead. So I should have done blue probably after my green. But it's still, we're at least in the light. We're in the light red right now, so it's not a big deal. There's no discussion this week. So if anybody didn't get to finish discussion topic, so if anybody didn't get to see the Wayne Thiebaud, you can check that out. Next week I'm gonna have either a video or a reading.
Cool.
For those students that are interested. I got a lot of that kind of material. So sometimes I'm using a more dry brush because again, the red gets very strong. So you kind of have to be careful with how you apply it. So especially with red, start slowly with the red. Hopefully you're taking some notes if you have your sketchbook out. But you want to start, or you review this video later. You want to start your red a little more timid, knowing that it could just easily obliterate your entire painting. Then you kind of have to spend a couple layers reestablishing that.
No.
All right. So at this point, I think actually I want to strengthen this a little bit here. Try and move on. Later, I'm going to break it up into like abstracted sort of little segments so that it looks like letters. Although I don't think I haven't done one of these demos where I ever get the letters to be readable. And I don't think that's the goal. That I would actually say that's not the goal. The goal is to make a painting that looks like a dollar if you were to look at it in a far distance. I have this pet peeve, so I have a 17-month-old baby at home. And we read a lot of books. He loves books.
Yay.
But I get a little annoyed because a lot of the illustrators are working on like an iPad or something, a digital illustration. And so sometimes they'll have something very far in the distance, but you can tell that the artist zoomed in and drew all those details. And so it looks out of place when you look at the overall illustration. Because when things are further away, there shouldn't be that much detail.
Yeah.
Right. And so in a way, you're not trying to paint a close-up of a dollar bill. You're trying to paint an image of a dollar bill as if you can see it from across the room, sitting on the pin on the wall. So I'm going to go back and I don't want to beat up my other brushes. So I'm going to put an ugly brush with my bad brushes. And scumble the green from the previous layer into some of the other areas. And when we're dry brushing, it's really important not to have too much oil, but also not too much pigment. So when I dry brush, notice how I started off on the outside first here. I didn't want to go in there because I didn't know how much it would obliterate because you have more paint on the surface of your brush or in your bristles.
Oh, that's nice.
And so if I get too much saturation of green over here, that's okay. It's the background. Eventually, it's going to be cardboard brown. But I'm still, trying to get my holidays all closed up.
Holidays.
Yeah, there's too many white spots here. Like I took a day off here and didn't decide not to do that. Sometimes you have to work it in different directions because I'm trying to cover some of this whiteness.
Yeah.
I don't want to obliterate all the color I have under there either. But as we get darker and darker, you have to be more careful with how you're applying the paint, how you're doing the scumbling, the wet into wet. And so I highly recommend not throwing away old brushes because they can be handy for things like this. So this is, I wouldn't be able to make precise edges and marks. So, but this is a great tool for just scumbling over. A lot of my brushes I've had for, 15 years at this point. Eventually they fall apart. You gotta get rid of them. All right, we're just moving on the line. I'm gonna skip to my cerulean blue that I should have gone to a little earlier.
When should you have gone to it?
Actually, it's pretty interchangeable. When I look at the value of this cerulean blue and the value of the red, they're pretty close.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's actually fine. I think I'm fine. It's not a big deal. This time I'm going to start on this edge. I can see there's a lot of paint on the brush, so I got to bring it down a little bit. I'm gonna use the paint that's on there already. Get my shadow in there. Again, every time I go do another pass, I'm starting in the darkest darks. That maybe has a little too much paint. Take a little bit off of it. You can always come in and correct it later. So kind of messed up that side. That happens. I'm not supposed to have that much of a shadow. I could try to correct it now at this point and like push this out, etc. I'm just going to leave it. I know I can fix that later in the drawing process. And it almost looks green because it's mixing with the very yellow sort of background along with the green that I have in here. Too much paint on there. Tumbling my red back in,
Nice.
starting off in the outside so I can control how much red before I go into the body of the dollar bill here. These try to cover up some of these white spots. Oh. So one of the reasons why I like to start with a colorful and brighter and lighter painting than starting with a dark one, like you might in a different class, another traditional method of learning, um, is that when we paint, we're painting with pigment. We're not painting with light, right? When we add all the colors of light together, we get white, right? Like a spectrum, right? The sun, etc. You get white. But when we deal with pigment and you mix all the colors, you get brown, sludge, mud, right? And so if you think about that, right, as you make a painting, you're adding more and more color. So there's a tendency to move towards less color, to move
Yeah.
more towards a mud color or towards a gray or darker browns. And by the time you're done with this underpainting, it'll kind of be close to the colors you're going to be using for your dollar bill, for the local color of your dollar bill. And I'm scumbling the red all over the background.
So it looks like basically you're making a brown anyway by mixing all the colors, right?
Absolutely, because essentially what's happening is as we make this drawing, we're creating tertiary colors.
Yep.
I'm going to start to clean up that drawing mishap I had earlier over here on this edge. Knowing that, the cardboard brown is going to get darker eventually anyway, so it'll get corrected somewhere along the way. But, to make myself feel better, I don't want to be looking at that ugly thing. I'll try to correct it a little bit. Give myself some build up that confidence again. So now I'm going into my dark red, which is like the cool red, almost like an alizarin. And you would essentially just do this all the way till you get to the last color. As soon as we start to do this, all of a sudden our grays are emerging. We're getting some gray in here when I mix this in here. And that's because red and green are sort of complements essentially, right? And so if we want to neutralize a color, want to make it gray, want to make it toned down, we add the complement. If you want to intensify the color, you add the complement somewhere nearby. You can mix them to kind of neutralize them. That becomes especially important when we start painting flesh tones. If you ever painted figures. Flesh tones, for the most part, are all muted colors. This is bothering me up here, so I'm going to use the negative space, or the negative, to redraw this light edge of my dollar bill. This is like a impromptu decision here. I lost that white edge, so I want to bring it back so I can see my drawing a little better. Okay. Sort of reestablish the top of mine, knowing that ultimately in the end, I'm going to be painting over all of these colors. Oh. I can already tell that in here, I'm gonna have to be making a lot more space for myself. I probably squished it up a little bit. But through the painting process, we'll get it more correct. Do something similar over here. Bring back my corner. So again, always thinking about getting the white of the canvas out of there. Here I'm just mushing this color around, trying to retain my drawing. At least the sort of blobby, blurry version of the drawing. The cerulean blue from the previous pass is now being added to the background first.
Nice.
Barely touching the surface over here, trying to get some of these little holidays covered up. So just enough, but not so much that I obliterate everything, you know, just this is a very dry brush, has almost has no Gamsol or oil on it, just didn't even put paint on it, just whatever was on the surface. And so we can already start to imagine what's going to happen next, right? Because now I'm going to go into let's see, I just with alizarin. So I'm going to go into my ultramarine blue, and then the last color will be my purple, right? So if I'm doing this now and I'm moving on from red, when I do this pass, the next scumbling I'm going to do is going to be the red that I just did right now. And so that red is going to hit this green and neutralize. So they're going to go brown. So I can already see that even though this is very green, it's going to go brown, knowing that the next color is going to be a complement. Did someone mention in the chat? Let's see here. Oh, so sorry. Someone asked if I was recording. Okay, never mind. So I can, you know, I know where it's going. I have my dark blue now, my ultramarine blue. I'm gonna start off in my darkest darks. Let's see, where are we at time-wise? Oh, 11:40. So class is going to be wrapping up. If you if you decide that you're going to do this assignment versus the postcard, because essentially what I would suggest doing is if you're going to do the postcard, you could take the same process and do this, what I've been doing in class, or you can start with however you want, but the goals will be the same. The goal will be to create the illusion that there's a postcard pinned to the surface of your canvas from a distance. And so the goal, you know, the goals would be similar, right? Like you would have to simplify, you'd have to soften your edges, you'd have to desaturate your color. So if you're doing a photograph, a painting of a photograph, you'd have to desaturate the color. So the darks wouldn't be as dark, they'd be grayed out a little bit, etc. So the goal, the effect goal would be the same. You know, but you can use whatever process you deem fit, or you can use this process to do the same thing. But I find that the dollar bill is an excellent exercise. We can see how this blue is mixing with the warms and the cools underneath, and it's making a much more neutral color. It's not the intense blue that we associate with ultramarine. It's getting us darker. You'll notice that I'm very impressionistic about how I approach, like, what do they call this stuff? Like filigree or something? These like little, the little like detail, ornate kind of flourishes. All of that is gestural, very loose. And in the end, I probably will keep them very loose. I'm not making an illustration, I'm making a painting. And there's a difference between an illustration and a painting. And so in the end, I don't, you know, I'm not trying to make like an illustration of a dollar bill that is going to go in a Time magazine article from 1987. Right? Where I make a painting. So a painting is different than an illustration in that a painting emphasizes an experience. There's many ways to differentiate what an illustration is from a painting. A lot of those barriers are very different than they were, let's say, in the 1950s. In the 1950s, there was a strong separation between commercial arts and illustration from the fine arts, but now they're sort of all mixed up. But one way that you can think about the difference between a painting and illustration is that a painting is about an experience versus an illustration is about illustrating an idea or a story. All right. Any questions before you guys start to leave? It's up to you to stick around or leave. I'm probably just gonna do this for a few more minutes before wrapping it up. I would paint the entire underpainting all the way through on camera for you guys, but baby woke up with the fever last night, and so I'm gonna go in.
Aw.
Yeah, we're not sure. He wasn't exposed to anybody or anything, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Baby.
Yeah. But I will continue this before class, so that way when we show up on next Friday, I will have my entire underpainting pass done, and I'll do a demo on how to of approaching the local color. So if you want to meet me on the same page, that your goal would be to get this entire underpainting done before next week.
Christian, I apologize. It's Doreen. I came in late and I don't know if you took attendance, so I just wanted to let you know.
Okay, I'm gonna be reviewing the video afterwards and see who attended because I didn't get to do that attendance earlier.
Oh, okay, okay.
Well, that's a good way.
Yeah, exactly. There's a very, they're very adamant about attendance and so forth. So I guess that's how they get funding because there's no grades.
Right.
Attendance is how they justify the funding. Which I think this is such a great resource for the community.
Oh, it is.
And
They used to have,
I was
they used to
blown
have them
away.
at all the colleges in California, and then there are only a few left.
Yeah, and apparently Saddleback's the one with the most classes offered.
Wow.
It's the most robust of its programs. But it's such a great resource, I obviously I think it's a great resource for young people too. I was in community college for 6 years before I figured out what I wanted to do.
Right.
But I'm first generation. And so in my family, there was sort of an expectation that you would go to community college first. I'm scumbling in the red, the dark red, and right away it's making a brownish gray color. Put too much there. And again, that's why I start on the outsides.
Christian, I had a question. Just in general, not specifically this lesson or this painting.
Yeah.
But when you said, I like when you said that your teacher said that painting is just a constant correction,
Yeah.
constantly correcting. How much like wiping away with either just a rag or with Gamsol do you do of things that you want to change, or do you just basically
Paint over.
repaint? Yeah, paint over, reshape.
I think that honestly, I think that's like